Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rich Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Gotta tell you, gonna start right off in the beginning. A little disappointed today. Woke up, very excited about the potential of the January 6th hearing. Maybe another bombshell, maybe a series of bombshells, maybe gonna put the little ribbon on the bow and all that stuff. Tie the yellow ribbon around the criminal referral package. Then I found out postponed. Little depressed about that. But here's the thing. The reality is. And again, the reason I'm depressed a little bit, we're about ready to launch this road tour. We're going to be on the road for the next month on our Working Class Heroes road tour, and not going to be doing the normal show that we do. We're focused on really just going into communities and talking to workers and focusing on working class issues. And we're not going to really be doing the daily show that we normally do. So this was kind of like one of the last things we were going to get into. It was going to kind of be a nice transition. And now I'm going to have to miss this down the road. But I understand. Look, you got Hurricane Ian hammering Florida. It's bad time. It's bad time, especially since I want, and I know all Americans want, the voters in Florida and the people in Florida to be able to focus completely on protecting themselves and their families right now, so that once this passes, and it will pass, and we get all past this and clean up and do all that, they can then focus all of their attention right where it then belongs, and that is the criming of Donald Trump. And holding people accountable. So let's get past this. Let's make sure that we help the folks who are going to be affected by this. And I know the White House is already making plans. Wheels are already in motion. Before the first drop hit the ground, they were prepping. That's what you want out of an administration. Unlike the last guy, who evidently now is, while Florida is being slammed, is begging for money. Because that's the right thing to do. Oh, please help us. Because rain, sleet, snow, hurricane, the con does not stop. So the billionaire needs your money. Very bizarre. Anyway, today the president held what is the first White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health since 1969. Over 50 years ago, Richard Milhous Nixon held the first one back then. And out of it, we got some improvements in helping people. Back when government used to do that. Wow. In fact, as I was thinking about it, I remember as a kid, benefiting from some of the programs that came out of that '69 conference. Summer lunch programs, and I've talked about this often. It was one of those things that I remember. You lined up at the local public school in the summertime, and you got a little hot lunch of some sort. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for most of the kids in that line, it was the only hot meal they were going to get that day. And one of the first things Ronald Reagan did when he became president, Ronald Ketchup is a vegetable Reagan, one of the first things he did is he gutted that program. And for me, that cruelty is something that's always stuck with me, and it's something Republicans are famous for now. I go back to the George W. Bush years. In every budget that he proposed ripping out this very, very small budget line that would give seniors, fresh vegetables and groceries, and low-income seniors the ability to eat, decent food. Somehow that had to go, but tax breaks for the wealthy corporations, front and center. In fact, increasing must. But the president said today, you know what? We can do this. I know we can do this. We have to harness our greatest resources, our fellow Americans, we the people, you and me. Everyone, he said, has an important role to play. And I agree, everyone does have a role to play in this. Because, I talk about this all the time. One of the great national disgraces is the fact that, honestly, one of the is the fact that we have children who go to bed hungry. We have children who go to bed hungry at night in the wealthiest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment. And that's a disgrace. Now, you had to trot out corporate America because corporations and some charitable foundations and industry groups, they had to get their accolades. They've made donations about $8 billion. And of course, we have to recognize them, Publix grocery store, and there's Novo Nordisk pharmaceutical company, Dione Food Company, they've donated some money. Meijer grocery store, they've offered a 10% discount for SNAP. There's corporate America is getting their praise. Thank you. Now, for me, no praise. We should be taxing you, and we should be taxing them at rates like we did back during the good socialist years of Dwight David Eisenhower, and feeding the children. But that's, in this moment, a bridge too far. And as I said, the start here, taxing the wealthy, that's where we start. And you go, but Rick, no, we can't. The wealthy, they're taxed enough already. Now, I look at the reality. New CBO report out, and thanks to Bernie Sanders, who asked for this Congressional Budget Office report on wealth inequality for families. They looked at the period, a 30-year period from 1989 to 2019, that 30-year gap. And guess what they found? Yeah, they found that the rich got richer, and the poor, you know the rest of this, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The CBO actually put this into numbers. And what they found out is the poorest half of us, 150 million of us, the bottom 50%. Those of us who work at the fast food places and the service sector and the retail jobs, those of us who get up every day, the working poor, and punch the clock and create the wealth for those at the very top to shuffle money from one pocket to the other, they saw their wealth actually decline. They hold only 2% of the nation's wealth. 150 million people. Half of the people in this country hold only about 2%. And now that's down from 1989, from when it was 4%. So they've actually lost ground. In fact, half. I mean, especially when you look at the fact that the top 1%, the folks in the rarefied air of America's penthouses, that top 1% holds 34% of all of the wealth in this country. And when they put out this graph, I mean, you could barely see the wealth of the bottom half. The next 40%, they've deadlined over the 30 years. They got a little bit wealthier, but not a lot. But wow, that top 10% and the top 1%, astronomical, just incredible. And as Bernie Sanders pointed out, the wealthiest 1% in this country got $29 trillion wealthier, while the average family saw barely anything. And when you look at the concentration of wealth held by the top 10%, that went from 64% back in '89 to 72%, driven mostly by, again, that 1% that holds now 34% of the wealth. The narrative goes simply like this. The wealthy are taking more of the pie, and the working class who bakes it and cooks it and serves it and cleans up after it, well, they're getting screwed. And we know this. We know it. So I want to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. When you look at this stuff, it's right in front of us. We have a tax code that encourages greed, that encourages hoarding, that encourages hooray for me and the heck with you and your children and the rest of us. Something needs to be done. The fact that the top 10%, the average wealth of someone in the top 10% in 1989 was $2.5 million. It's now $6.4 million. While the bottom 25% had zero wealth in 1989, they're now in the negative 11,000 range. They actually fell that far backward. Amazing stuff. Let's quick go to the phones. We got Kurt on line one. Kurt, how are we doing today?
Oh, hold on a second. I'm sorry. Hey, I wanted to tell you that I did watch some of that White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health today.
Okay.
That you were talking about.
Yep.
And I gotta say, I was listening to Secretary Vilsack and some of President Biden before I go back to work, but I actually emailed Secretary Vilsack after I saw him do his little speech, and I told him, you know, this is kind of in the realm of President Kennedy's moonshot of the 1960s, trying to get American to the moon and back safely by the end of the 1960s, or President Biden's cancer moonshot and cancer as we know it. I mean, this sounds to me like a great national goal to try and end hunger by 2030. It's going to be a hard one, and like I quoted in my email to Secretary Vilsack today, to quote John Kennedy, we do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And I said, we need to get you and, how did I say? I said something to the effect of you and the rest of the Biden administration have to find a way to get every American involved in order for this to work. And that's how it's going to work.
Yep.
That's how it's going to have to work. And believe it or not, I did get a response back within 17 minutes.
Wow. And what did they say?
He said, thanks. Well, Secretary Vilsack said, thanks for the note, and by the way, thanks for not rubbing in the Browns win over the Pittsburgh Steelers last week.
So you then know that someone actually read that and that was a bit personalized, wasn't? Because my mind's going, well, that was an automated response. So they didn't automate the response, the Browns response there, though.
No, because it was actually him, because I do have his personal email address.
Well, outstanding. So how do you think we get to this point? I mean, I've said, look, I have friends who say, we need to go the religious route. The churches need to do this, and this whole route. We need faith-based initiatives. And I go, we tried that. It hasn't worked. We've done a lot of that stuff. It hasn't worked. Where do you see us going?
It needs to be a public. I think it needs to be a public, meaning the government and private industry working together. That's how things used to work, where the government and private industry kind of partnered together and worked together to make this happen. Sometimes the old ways are good. Find a way for everybody from the youngest person in the country. I mean, think about it. Before you and I were even born, how did we get to the moon? How did we get to the moon? Do you know how?
No, go ahead. Tell me.
Okay. President Kennedy actually made it so that everybody had a stake in it. Kids, young school children, used to go to school and buy savings stamps to help fund the NASA research, to help get to the moon by the end of the 60s. We need to find a way to get young people involved. When we were going to school, we had those Campbell soup label drives. We need to do something like that in order to help get money out there to help fund research in some way, but I just think we need to find a way to get every human being involved so they can have a sense of a national goal again. And what better way at this point than trying to get rid of hunger by 2030? It's going to be a tall order, no pun intended, with the order thing, but it's going to take a lot of initiative, it's going to take a lot of involvement, and it's going to take a lot of convincing that everybody kind of like ask now what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country kind of stuff.
Yeah, here's the thing, Kurt, and this is where my mind goes. It shouldn't be this difficult. It should not be that hard. I don't know anyone. I know no one. No political stripe, no red hat, no blue hat. I know no one who isn't appalled by the fact that we have children who go to bed hungry. We have veterans who are homeless. It seems to me we just haven't had leadership to move us in the direction to do away with this. And I'm glad President Biden has taken this by the horns. This seems like a simple fix to me. The problem is money. And what we need to start doing is talking about taxing the people who have it, the very well-to-do
How about
who
we
have
do
done
this?
way too well for way
how
too
about-
long. That's what we need to be doing. It seems simple
How
to
about
me.
we
We
do
need
this?
money. We need to put food on the
Okay.
table. We need to feed
Okay,
children.
the simple thing. Okay, then the simple thing would be, how about we do this? We go back to a 74% tax rate before Ronald Reagan.
Yes. Good start. I'm with you. Go.
We also make it so that big pharma and big oil will be forced to pay windfall taxes, and it goes into something like that. A portion of it goes into that, as well as research and development on other things. You know, but we still need to make it so that people feel like they're involved in
Yes,
it too.
and this is
I don't
where-
know how.
This is where, Kurt, where I go to this point where you explain to people what we're going to do with that increase in tax money, that revenue that's coming in, and where it's going to go. It's going to go to feeding children. It's going to go to getting homes for veterans. It's going to go for ensuring that we get drug and alcohol treatment for people who need it, that we do the missions, that we do the work that needs to be done. I don't know anyone who's against that idea.
You mean like when Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House?
Yep. I
Some
remember
of
that.
the money that was going to be raised for that was going to go into research and development for alternative sources of energy.
Yep. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and unfortunately Reagan poo-pooed it, and 45 years later, look where we're at.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, I'm probably overstepping it a little bit as far as what needs to be done, and it's probably simpler. But I don't know. There's got to be more to it than just that. But you're right. We need to start raising taxes on some of these higher wealthy people, and I would start with raising the tax rate, the top tax rate, not on everybody, the top tax rate on people making over a certain amount, like up to 74%, like it was before 1981.
Yeah, it's not even a percent. It's not even an income, because these people aren't making incomes. These people are, and we need to change what is income. These are people who are accumulating massive amounts of wealth and assets. That's
capital gains and inheritance taxes,
Yep.
or not inheritance, but inheritance and everything like that too.
Yeah.
That's where you need to go first, like Joe Kennedy did to help pay for colleges. He just taxed pennies on the dollar from the time he was the Securities and Exchange Commissioner under FDR. He made it so that in order to help pay for public college for 30 years, up until I think after his son was president, maybe a little after that, he charged pennies on the dollar, taxed pennies on the dollar on capital gains, and that's what helped make it so that we could fund 80% of college tuition to public universities, colleges and universities, and you and I were only responsible for 20%.
Yep, that's what we need to go back to, a transaction tax, and you're absolutely right. But Kurt, I appreciate the time. Good stuff, man.
All right, thank you, and you have a good night. Hey, and by the way, good luck on your trip.
Thanks so much, Kurt. Appreciate it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You've got a thought? Give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
You know, I go back to this, and the reality we overthink this stuff too much. The reality is we're the wealthiest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment, and when you have 10% of the population food insecure, that is a problem, and it's a problem we can solve. It's a problem we can solve with increased funding for food programs. It's a problem we can solve by taxing the very wealthy, who are doing very well, thank you very much. In fact, sorry to say, too well. When the best thing that they can think about doing in their businesses is handing out more money to their buddies instead of reinvesting in business and creating new jobs and doing other things, more creative things, when all it is about lining their pockets, we got a problem. We got a problem. Let's go to Alice on line 2. Alice, how are we doing today?
We're doing okay. What I wanted to say was this. Yeah, we definitely need to end hunger, homelessness, and a lack of health care and education.
Yeah.
And we definitely need to raise the taxes on the wealthy and the corporation. And the problem is, though, that the majority, and I'm going to say majority, and I'm sure some of the listeners out there are going to go, what are you talking about? The majority of the Republican base is just totally uneducated in how everything works. And they're easily manipulated. So the Republican politicians are going, oh, they're going to raise the taxes on everybody, and good jobs are going to go away, and people start screaming. And what they don't realize is while they're being told by the Republicans that, everything is the Democrats' fault because they want to be communist, socialist, God knows what, people are losing their jobs and they're losing their livelihoods because of the greed of these wealthy news corporations. So, again, the Republicans put all the emphasis on stupid stuff like critical race theory and what you can do with your kid and what you can't do with your kid. And let's worry about religion. And instead of worrying, and it's a way to deflect that base. So they're all worried about all that, and instead of worrying about actually what's going on, because they don't understand what's going on.
Or the other side of it is they don't care, and that's the other part. This is where you look at the homeless problem that we've had for so long. You look at the hunger problem that we've had for so long, and I hear my Christian friends saying this is the job of the churches. Well, how come Christian folk ain't doing Christian stuff? I hear a lot of talk of prosperity gospel and all of that, but I'm not seeing a lot of that trickling down to those poor people.
Oh, I have to agree with you there, because you have all those mega churches, and we're talking basically,
yep,
your evangelical bunch that are these wealthy televangelists, and they're pulling in billions and billions, and they're certainly not following their Jesus's rules of take care of the poor and the widow and the hungry and all that.
Yep, they're taking care of themselves, and that's what they're doing. You're absolutely right, Alice. Got to take a quick break right here. Appreciate the thoughts. Thank you.
Bye.
No, and highlight that giggling guy from down in Texas at Olstein. When there was that hurricane, that flood going through Houston, they didn't let anybody in that church. Nope. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1965. That was the day the Delano grape strike began in California. The strike came a year after activists had forced Congress to end the Bracero contract labor program. The Filipino Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, led by Larry Idalong, Philip Vera Cruz, and others, called the strike against the Delano growers and the Coachella Valley grape growers. It had been a record harvest. Farm workers demanded higher wages, humane working conditions, and union recognition. When the growers refused, thousands walked out of the fields. A week later, the Mexican-American National Farm Workers Association, led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, joined the strike. It was a historic moment. Within a year, the two unions would merge to form the United Farm Workers. The union sent strikers to the Oakland docks to persuade the longshoremen not to load non-union grapes. Many of the Filipino workers in the San Joaquin Valley worked in the Alaska fish canneries organized by the ILWU in the off-season. And so the ILWU honored their union brothers' request. Thousands of cases of grapes were left to rot on the docks. This initial victory led Chavez to organize a grape boycott against heavyweights DeGiorgio and Shenley Industries. 6 months into the strike, union leaders marched 300 miles from Delano to Sacramento to bring attention to their struggle. They hoped to pressure growers to the negotiating table and legislators to act on their behalf. For 5 years, the strike and boycott continued with marches, organizing, and picket line arrests. Gradually, the UFW began winning higher wages, union recognition, and hiring halls. Finally, in 1970, a collective bargaining agreement covering 10,000 workers was reached.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Let me say one word to you: nuts. Now, let me say one name to you: Ted Cruz. They've become synonymous with the Texas lawmaker perennially topping national lists of goofy right-wing political goobers. Only, Ted can't rightly be called a lawmaker, for he's not a serious participant in that process, instead devoting his senatorship to political stunts and picking silly PR fights with a growing list of enemies. Running out of people to attack, Ted has found another species for his vitriol: fictional icons. He's been padding his right-wing credentials by going after Mr. Potato Head, Mickey, and Pluto, and, believe it or not, Muppets. This U.S. Senator has dedicated the power and public resources of his office to demonize popular creatures on Sesame Street, specifically Big Bird and lovable little Elmo. Ted rants he has proof that Muppets are covert tools of, quote, government propaganda. So this ridiculous excuse of a senator is saving America from Muppets. But for a whole bag of assorted nuttiness, you can't beat Senator Rick Scott's 11-point plan to rescue America. A disgraced former healthcare mogul, this mega-millionaire reinvented himself as a wingnut Florida senator, and he now chairs a policy arm of the Republican Party. In February, he set forth a stunning agenda of far-out right-wing extremism that he says his party will push if they retake the Senate this November, including 1. Implementing new federal taxes on the poorest half of Americans, 2. Terminating Social Security and Medicare, 3. Completing Donald Trump's folly of a border wall. This is Jim Hightower saying fiddle-faddlers like Cruz and Scott have turned the once proud U.S. Senate into the little nut shop on the Hill.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as Hurricane Ian is slamming into Florida, well, I'm hearing a couple million people now already without power. Kind of makes you go, boy, I'm glad we got someone in the White House who's not vindictive and holding back aid just because. And I want to remind people that the senator from Florida, Marco Rubio, and the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, both voted against the aid for the victims of Hurricane Sandy when they had the chance to do that. It's kind of one of those things to think about. I know you're going to share some thoughts on what's going on in Florida. I've asked Rick Wilson to come talk with us. He is a Florida resident and there now. He is also the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Rick, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having me on. And I want to say I'm up in North Florida where it was pointed at us for a couple of days but turned away. And our thoughts here in our family and with our team at the Lincoln Project are very much with the 1.6 or 1.9 million people right now who are without power, and we are praying hard for the folks in Orlando. It is still approaching Orlando. It is between a 2 and a 3 as of right now still. And it is beaming right towards Orlando, one of the biggest cities in the state. And Unfortunately, it's not done doing damage.
And it's horrible, and our thoughts are with the folks there as well. But I keep coming back to this moment where grateful that we've got a guy in the White House who is already planning for the response, is already got the wheels moving in the direction to help people and do the right thing, and not because it's political, but because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, as you and I were talking about just before we came on the air, no one's going to wake up in the morning and wonder, hey, is Joe Biden's response going to be to throw paper towels? Is it going to be to, as Trump did in California, make fun of them and say, oh, you should have raked your forests. Too bad about the fire sweeping your state. And look, Florida is a state that is very vulnerable to this kind of disaster. And governors of both parties over the years, at least of my political and observational career, have either risen or fallen by how they handle not just the technical parts of this, but how they relate to the victims of these storms, how they relate to people who are injured by these cataclysmic storms and these events. And this one is. I mean, look, it's as big as anything I've experienced in my lifetime since Andrew. And I was down there for Andrew. In 1991, I came down. I was working for the federal government at the time, and came down for Andrew, and it was unbelievable. But this storm is going to do. It's going to. Andrew punched Miami and then went into the Everglades. This is going to be a much worse scenario.
This is terrible. And look, this is not going to stop. We're going to have these time and time again, and response is important, but also figuring out how we deal with this and how we evacuate people. And I spent the day looking at Twitter and hearing people say, well, everyone should leave and everyone should evacuate, and you go, yeah, not everyone has the resources to evacuate every time there's a scare. Not everyone has the ability to go. Some people have to hunker down, and this is where government has to step in.
Well, it is one of those moments where the vulnerabilities of many people in the state of Florida that play out, because we have such a large population of seniors, because we have such a large population of people who live in manufactured housing trailers, because we have so many people who are dependent on they have to drive. There's no public transport here in Florida to speak of, and you can't move people at scale out of a place like Fort Myers or a place like Cape Coral. Those have very thin public infrastructure as that sort of stuff goes. And it's hard to organize, and it's hard to motivate people to leave in the state of Florida because, this is a state full of very stubborn people. I'm a fifth-generation Floridian, and I can tell you there's a sort of point of pride with most Floridians. Like, I'm not going to go for a 1 or a 2. Well, this was a 4, maybe a 5, as it came ashore. And it is the damage we're going to see when the sun comes up tomorrow. I can't even imagine. It is a heavy weight.
Now, you said this is something that's happened multiple times over the years, and it's almost a sense of pride to live through it. Do you see things getting worse? Do you see, as someone, look, I just read the news. I have never been through a hurricane. I've never seen the devastation up close and personal until far after we were down for Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in the aftermath to help clean up and stuff. But the power, the devastation of it happening. Are things getting worse? I mean, is climate change making things worse? Where do you put all this in the spectrum of where we are?
We had Cat 4s and 5s that hit Florida before the point where the climate change problem is as evident as it is now, and maybe the frequency is changing. But Florida has always sort of been uniquely vulnerable, just given our geography, to this kind of thing. And I do think we're obviously going to have to plan for. And no matter where the climate trend line goes, we need to plan for the worst. And you can't have a state where, look, 50% of the population of Florida, here's a scary stat for you, 50% of the population of Florida lives within 5 miles of the water. 50% of the population of Florida lives within 5 miles
Wow.
of the water. And it's low slung, it's low. I mean, 2 days ago, it was supposed to hit Tampa. Now, my parents live in Tampa, my sister lives in Tampa, and, you know, they were in the evacuation zone where a 9-foot storm surge came ashore today in Southwest Florida. They would have been underwater, and they did not want to go. So half of this is sort of psychological. We've got to prepare people that a storm like this is not something you fool around with. And if there are going to be more of these 4s and 5s, then we really got to shake people out of the idea that you can ride it out. I'm really concerned about Florida from a 30,000 foot sort of economic perspective, because we are a state that for generations was considered very affordable, and people moved here. They came here from Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts. They came here in droves because housing was cheap. Well, now we have a huge housing crisis in Florida. The prices have gone through the roof on everything, on both housing prices per se and on rents. And you know, when we end up with a storm like this, we're probably going to lose thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of units, both of rental properties and of homes, of mortgage homes. And I am concerned that the insurance market here, which has been in collapse for a long time, and it's going to completely go under and cost average Florida families vast increases in their property insurance rates. I mean, look, my property insurance has gone up about 3 times, by a factor like 3 in the last 5 years. I can't imagine what it's going to do for people who are in the really bad parts of the state for storms. And honestly, I mean, fact, it matters to me. I don't like paying that much money, but I can more easily afford it than a lot of people. And I worry that we're going to end up with a whole class of citizens in the state who cannot afford to insure their homes or their property, and it's going to be catastrophic if this keeps happening.
No, and what you're going to be having is people leaving the state in droves.
You will. That's what will eventually happen, Rick, is you'll end up getting folks who say, I thought it was paradise. I liked having, I liked having, 8 months of beautiful weather and, 4 months that kind of not so great with humidity and storms. But if that 4-month window in the tropical storm season involves losing everything you own and can't insure it, that's probably going to drive people, back out of Florida. And to be honest, this is something I'm going to bring a little politics into right now. For the last 2 years, Ron DeSantis and the Republican legislature, they have been able to pass every bill under the sun to go after Don't Say Gay and Disney and critical race theory and all these other book ban and all this other crap, but they haven't done property insurance reform. And I don't know how Floridians are going to feel about this in a few months, because they're going to start getting those bills after the cleanup starts, and it is not going to be pretty. And it is something that I think it's frankly been irresponsible of them. I get it that that's the only political strategy they have, right, but it has been vastly harmful, I think, to the people of Florida. And I'm hopeful there'll be a reckoning in that regard.
I hope so as well. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Rick Wilson. He's the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. You want to check out the work that they do, lincolnproject.us is their website. We'll get links out on social media. Now, you point out that they've gone after all these ideological bills to divide and rip us apart. Whereas in these moments, we know what's coming. We know these storms are going to continue to happen. We know they're going to continue to grow in magnitude. What have they done to try and mitigate some of the negative effects? What have they done to grow a transportation network to help people who can't get out? What have they done to help your state move forward and deal with actual crisis instead of the crisis they create?
Right. They have a catalog of imaginary demons in their head that they will fight against all day long. But when there's an actual crisis put before them, and look, it is not a surprise to anybody that hurricanes hit Florida. This is something that has been well established from the dawn of time. But they get a quicker political payoff. Nobody gets to go on Fox News because they did something good to fight against, to mitigate hurricane damage or improve the transportation system or to train people on how to evacuate. And look, there are people in the Florida government right now, not in the political side, but in the emergency management side, who are breaking their tails and who are doing everything they can to help those people down there. And I'm not criticizing those folks at all, but the legislative process in this state is about rewarding major donors. It is about rewarding big developers. And there are very few incentives to improve the ability to be resilient in a situation like this.
And again, this is another example of a failed leadership, failing to address major needs, and the fact that you now have, I think you pointed out, 1.9 million people without power, again shows how antiquated our systems are, and how we haven't built resiliency into those systems to be able to withstand these storms.
Yeah, I mean, look, if this is a dumb Florida inside thing. If the state and federal government would work together to bury power lines, this problem would be solved very quickly. You would keep the lights on for millions and millions of homes. If you help people transition to solar and battery backups in their homes, it would make these kinds of crises not comfortable, but more sustainable. And again, it's stuff that people with means are going to survive this a lot better and a lot easier than the people who have been left behind in the state. And there are, frankly, a lot of people who have been very much left behind in the state.
No, and but is that not the basic thesis statement for all of America? I mean, I started off with the CBO report today, saying that the very wealthy have gotten very wealthy, while the bottom half of the country have actually seen their wealth go down over these last 30 years.
This, and as I mentioned earlier, the legislative process in Florida is so wildly corrupt. It is so insanely corrupt. People think, oh, Louisiana or New Jersey, they're the most corrupt. No. Florida's legislative process is completely corrupt. It is a criminal enterprise to reward campaign donors to the Republican Party. Those people have done nothing. In fact, they have done things that have allowed developers to continue to expand in places where they shouldn't be building, into low-lying areas and sensitive wetlands and all these other things. And that entire process is a very rigged game, where we have plenty of money to fly asylum seekers to Martha's Vineyard, but we don't have money to provide emergency transport for people who are in the eye of a hurricane from nursing homes. And so I have a lot of emotions about this tonight. And look, you and I may differ on a lot of like philosophical things about economic stuff, but the fact of the matter is, when you've got a corrupt political system, as Florida does, at a profoundly corrupt level, that's not conservative. That's just criminal.
Yeah.
That's not free markets. It's a rigged system from the top down that is rewarding extraordinarily wealthy companies and individuals in this state, and it's doing it over and over and over again. And look, I know, because I used to be part of it. Honest answer.
And that's why I'm glad you're out there fighting the fight and drawing attention to this stuff. And I hope my listeners in Pennsylvania are listening, because a guy running for governor wants the state of Pennsylvania to be the Florida of the Northeast. So if you want all the problems we're hearing about in Florida to come to Pennsylvania, you know the guy to vote for. But Rick, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the thoughts.
Hey, Rick, always a pleasure to be on with you, my friend. Have a great night, and hope your audience and folks listening tonight will keep those folks in Southwest and Central Florida in their thoughts and prayers.
Stay safe, brother. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, man.
Good stuff. Rick Wilson, co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-7425. Quick break. Right back after this.
Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Would you be willing to stand up in solidarity with your fellow workers, even if it cost you your job? Well, on this day in labor history, the workers at Mersey Docks and Harbour Company in Liverpool, England, answered that question. The year was 1995. 329 Mersey dock workers refused to cross a picket line that was being walked against another company on the docks. The workers at Torside had been fired for protesting against erosions in job security and increasingly unpredictable scheduling. They were speaking out against the casualization of their labor. When the Mersey dock workers would not cross the Torside picket line, they too were fired. Dock workers across the world stood up in solidarity with the Mersey workers against this unjust treatment. They knew if it could happen in Liverpool, it might happen anywhere. Pickets sprung up from Norway to Japan, from Australia to Italy, and into the United States. It was a global outpouring of solidarity. The strike wore on for 850 days. 1 year into the strike, dock workers held an international day of action in support of the Liverpool workers. Finally, 2.5 years after they were fired, the dock workers agreed to a settlement. They did not get their jobs back, but they did get severance pay. A film was made about the struggle. The proceeds were used to purchase a bar in Liverpool. It is known as the Dockers Pub and has become a space for working class organizing. The International Dock Workers Council was also born from this strike. Today, the council has 90,000 members, a lasting movement of solidarity. 20 years after the strike, dock workers from across the world gathered in Liverpool to remember the struggle.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Let's go to the phones. Got Andrew on line 1. Andrew, how are we doing today?
Doing great. Rick, that interview was fabulous. That was so good, so informative, and boy, he was spot on with everything.
Rick's a good guy.
My second point is, I grew up, while I'm in Detroit now, I grew up in Rhode Island, and I lived through Hurricane Bob and Hurricane Gloria, and those hurricanes were nothing like this monster hitting Florida now.
Yeah, our thoughts are with the people in South Florida. And look, you know, as I said in the beginning, I'm grateful we got somebody in the White House who's going to get the folks the resources that they need without which hat they're wearing or which allegiance they've sworn to. We're just going to help people, and I take solace in that.
But my point for calling was about the taxation points that people were bringing up earlier in the show. I truly believe we need to tax the very wealthy in this country, but be careful about the idea of taxing corporations, because won't they just put off their increased taxes onto the consumers? The other idea is, you know, we hear about constantly on these corporate news programs every night about, the inflation is comparable to 40 years ago, 41 years ago. No, tell us the truth. Tell us who was the president when the inflation was this high. Then tell us what the inflation was 40 years ago. Wasn't it like 17%?
Yeah.
And our inflation right now is like 8%. And the inflation back 40 years ago was our country did it to itself, where this is global inflation right now. We need the problem with the Democrats is messaging. They don't do it. And if they would join up with a group like the LinkedIn Project, who does messaging perfectly, maybe we could get somewhere.
No. See, the difference is the Lincoln Project are for Republicans. They understand the messaging. They understand that they understand that you don't do things in a million words that you can do in 5. It is about being straight and forthright. But I want to talk about your tax idea for a second. Because you go back to the era that a lot of my MAGA hat wearing friends like to point to as the greatest era in American history, and that's the late 40s, 50s, 60s, that golden, that Norman Rockwell, Leave It to Beaver era that I've been talking about for a while. We did that by having high taxes on the very wealthy, top marginal rate at 92% on rich people, a corporate tax rate at 56%. We were taxing corporations at a very high rate. We had strong government investment in things like infrastructure and healthcare and education, and also we had very strong unions. So for me, the corporate tax part of this incentivizes corporations to invest in their business instead of just loading their pockets. My problem with where we are right now, Andrew, is you look at all these stock buybacks. These are corporations telling us, yes, taxpayer, yes, Andrew, yes, Rick, you've given us all these tax breaks. In fact, you've given us so much, we don't know what to do with all this cash other than divvy it up amongst ourselves. We gave these tax breaks because they told us they were going to create jobs, they were going to reinvest in new plants and equipment and workers and all this stuff, and they haven't. And you go back to that golden era of the American working class, they were investing in their businesses. They were reinvesting in machinery and raises for workers and healthcare, and they were doing things, I think, in a better way. So for me, a higher corporate tax rate is going to make those people go, well, screw this. I'm not giving money to the government. I'm going to reinvest it in my business. So for me, it's a different incentive in my view. So that's where I come from.
What about the threat of windfall profit taxes on these corporations?
I'm in favor of it. I just don't think it's enough. I think if you have a high tax rate, I think it's universal across the board based on size of government of your company, like we had in the past. Small businesses got a lower load, big businesses paid a heavier load, and just like the wealthy paying 92% tax on that dollar over $1.6 million in today's wealth. They didn't pay that. They opted to do other things with their money. They gave money to school, to colleges, to put names on buildings, to hospitals. They did all kinds of things with it to help the community as opposed to just lining their pockets. So for me, it's about incentives. And a higher tax rate, I think, does change that calculus a little bit. At least that's my view on it.
And last, my idea on inflation is, this is worldwide, but we can control it somewhat in this country. We cause inflation. We the buying public. If we don't spend the money on these very high-priced items,
yep,
it will force them to rethink what they're going to do.
And real quick, if I could add in this real quick, I think what the government needs to do, what Biden needs to do, is we need to start talking about antitrust. A lot of our inflation is due to the fact that in industry after industry, you have a handful of companies that control the industry, and there's no competition. In the old days, you'd have one player who wants to get a little bit more of the market share, lowering their prices or keeping their prices low to get that market access. You don't have that now. You've basically got a system that's all collusion because they're lining their pockets. But Andrew, I appreciate the call, man. Good stuff.
Spot on, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Call back again at any time. Got to take a quick break right here. If you've missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Always there, always available. Share with your friends. You got a question, thought, comment, something on your mind, make sure you email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Anything you got on your mind. In fact, ugly stuff goes to the top.
Our adage is always hide from the wind and run from the water.
Hurricane Ian takes dead aim at Florida.
This is a historic storm for this province. There's no question about that.
Hurricane Fiona was the strongest storm on record to hit Canada.
KCAA's Inland Talk Express.